In the beginning, before love, before fear, there was the sea. It reached away, wide as the mind, deep as dreaming, rolling, heaving, visible evidence of the reality and power of the gods. But there came a time when men mounted frail craft and dared the liquid landscape the gods had claimed for themselves. And it must be the gods were furious at the trespass, for they hurled hurricanes at the intruders and rode seas at their vessels and placed rocks, reefs, and tempests in the way of their ships. How many found in the deep a sailor's grave, none can say. Yet over the ages, thousands of ships, millions of mariners, and their passengers have been lost, their vessels claimed by fire or gale, rocks or reefs or monsters risen from the depths. The sea has taken a tragic toll, but of all the disasters that have befallen the souls that sail upon the sea, none has been as dramatic nor as terrible as on that dark, dreadful, moonless night the unsinkable Titanic went down, and 1,500 men, women, and children, after prayer and screaming, held their breath until they could hold it no more.
The first and final voyage of the Titanic was a terrible human tragedy. It was a moment isolated in time, but it was also a part of a great continuum, reaching back to the first dugout log canoe, to the ships of sail, to the vessels that will carry us into the uncharted oceans of space. It was a pivotal moment on that continuum, a moment that would change forever the way we view the relationship between nature and technology. Never again would we challenge nature with such arrogance and innocence, assuming that our genius would make us invulnerable to the forces of nature, especially those encountered by ships at sea.
Here at the historic old port of Gloucester in Massachusetts, we are reminded of our long and stormy love affair with the sea. It was from here that the ships in Rudyard Kipling's Captains Courageous sailed. Out there in the harbor is the reef of Norman's Woe, immortalized in Wordsworth's poem Wreck of the Hesperus. In the long history of this port, some 10,000 mariners have gone down to the sea, never to return to shore. Their schooners claimed by the same sea that claimed the great Titanic. But even though Gloucester is one of the oldest seaports in North America, it is actually a newcomer in mankind's seafaring experience. This port was established no more than 400 years ago. The Adventure, last of the great Gloucester schooners, was launched less than a century ago. Yet sailors have been going down to the sea in ships for many thousands of years. The voyage that led to the Titanic began when the first adventurer discovered that a log or a few reeds tied together in a bundle or an animal skin filled with air could carry him over the waters. Then, voyage by voyage, era by era, by trial and error, mariners improved their rudimentary designs, seeking always to create vessels that could move them farther, faster, safer, and more efficiently across the seas. They added outriggers to their canoes, then sails. In their double canoes with crab-claw sails, Polynesians made epic voyages across the Pacific centuries before the Christian era. The Irish monk St. Brendan the Navigator is said to have sailed his leather boat to America 500 years before the Viking dragon ships reached Newfoundland and 1,000 years before Columbus. The vessels grew larger and more efficient. The oar-powered galleys gave way to deep-holed, full-rigged sailing ships and to the vessels of Magellan and da Gama and Columbus that would discover continents and circle the globe. The fighting ships of Nelson and John Paul Jones evolved. Then the great windjammers and the clipper ships of Donald Mackay, like Flying Cloud and Sovereign of the Seas. With masts as tall as a 20-story building, the clippers were so fast that they held the speed record from New York to San Francisco around the Horn for more than 100 years. New technologies and materials evolved. Iron replaced wood. The little iron-hulled bark Elissa sailed to ports around the world for 90 years. Now, after being saved from the shipwreckers, she sails again. It is claimed Alyssa has sailed farther across the seas than any ship ever built, including those in our own era. Then came steam and engines, coal and clattering decibels. Sail gave way to the steamship. It was a long voyage from the leather boat of St. Brendan to the Titanic. As the century turned, the great liners ruled the seas. There was a race between nations to see who could build the largest, fastest, most luxurious ship upon the sea. The city of New York, Mauritania, Lusitania, Titanic. It was a very long voyage that led to the great ship rising on the waves in slip number 3 at the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland.
For much of nautical history, ship design and construction was a matter of sight, of feel, of tradition, of what had worked over the generations. In many parts of the world, boats are still built more by eyeball and by rule of thumb than by science.
This is the boatyard of Harold Burnham. His family has been building boats here for 7 generations. Their boats are of wood, fashioned in the traditional manner. Obviously not as large as liners, yet they are designed to sail anywhere in the world, under any conditions of wind and sea.
When you build a boat, having a good eye for the boat is extremely important. You have, with boats, many times the way that they look, they're a combination of form and function, and the proper form will function well. Fair lines in a hull will let the water run by it, and having the eye to see what's a fair line and what's not a fair line, and having the way of judging the way things look is very important to a boat builder. And rules of thumb in boat building are also very important. From the earliest days, people have built boats, and one of the most important aspects of vessel design are ratios and proportions. There's certain ratios set up for different types of boats, and a friendship sloop is a small sailboat that sails off the coast, and the beam is a third the length, and the depth is half the beam, and the mast is the length of the vessel. And knowing all of these ratios is very important to designing the boat and making a boat that's seaworthy. And if you make a boat and follow traditional ratios, you almost cannot go wrong. And then, as long as you have an eye for how the lines are going to lay in those ratios and how the vessel's going to be put together, then you can perfect that. But it's a bad idea to vary those ratios very much, or else you might have an unsuccessful boat.
Harold Burnham is not only a builder of boats, he is an experienced captain who has spent much of his life at sea.
As far as the construction of a boat goes, the thing that I would say is to build it rugged. A boat has to be built so it can take whatever comes. And many times I've been at sea on vessels when the whole bow of the boat is out of the water one minute, and the next minute it's plunged down into a wave, and I've hit waves that are so big we've broken every light bulb on the ship, and freighters and tankers and things, and they take a lot of abuse out there, and they have to be built rugged.
Burnham built the 65-foot schooner Thomas E. Lannon using the same techniques as were used building the original Gloucester fishing schooners, among the finest and fastest sailing vessels ever built. The lines of the Lannon emerged from a small wood model Burnham carved by hand and by eye.
I cut about 20 models building the Lannon before I settled upon a shape that I liked. A half model is basically constructed of a number of boards put together in laminates. And what I did is I take a chisel and I cut the model out to the shape that I want it to be. And basically by eye and by feel, I can tell how the water is going to go around the boat, how it's going to handle. And that's a time-proven method for designing boats.
Here at the U.S. Naval Academy, men and women are trained to sail the most modern ships on the sea. Over the years, there have been enormous changes in ship design, yet much has remained the same. It is a science, yet it remains an art. Roger Compton is a marine architect and chairman of the Department of Naval Architecture, Oceanography, and Marine Engineering at the U.S. Naval Academy.
Science and art in ship design and shipbuilding is one of the things that makes it most fascinating, I think. There are a lot of people that would say boats and naval architecture, the design of boats, has been around since Noah. And by now you ought to have it right. Well, the bottom line is that there is such complex hydrodynamics going on around the hull that we still don't have a real solid confidence in being able to predict it using computer codes. So that we still rely on this very, to some people's way of thinking, old-fashioned way of doing business by building a model and testing it. The changes that get made